Hello, my name is Darian Cuffey, and my literary topic is Fanny Fern, also known as Sarah Payson Willis Parton. Fanny Fern differs from a lot of the female writers in her time in the 19th century in that she wrote about topics that she wanted to write about, but she also wrote about topics that no one else was really talking about. Fanny Fern's work includes stuff about prostitution, venereal disease, prison reform, traditional gender roles, and really women weren't writing about these things. Women had more of a sentimental view on writing in that they were writing about marriage and children, child rearing, things that females were supposed to know about and supposed to write about. So Fern really stood out and gathered a large base from being outspoken and bold enough to write what she was thinking about society. In 1851, Fern published her first article. It sold 70,000 copies. But before that, Fern went through a series of hardships, I would say. She lost her first husband, leaving her with 2 children and working dead-end jobs. And afterwards, her father nor her brother tried to help her in any regard. After which, they forced or influenced her to marry into a second abusive relationship where Fern wasn't appreciated and quickly abandoned her husband, which brought shame on not only herself but her family, which made her family exile her. So Fern, at the time of her major success, was completely unsupported. She became one of the highest paid male or female writers, but still was rejected by her own brother. Her writings were still rejected by her brother saying that her writings weren't light enough or simplistic enough. They just didn't hold the general tone that females should hold when they were writing. So Fern really focused on her work and her immediate family and her third husband, leaving her initial family behind. Her father and her brother both worked for the newspaper, and I'm pretty sure they're what gave her the influence to eventually write in the paper, but neither supported her work. After her first article was published, she wrote for the True Flag, and then she wrote for the New York Ledger, which gave her a weekly column spot, and she became one of the first women to have a weekly column in the 1800s. And as I said before, she was one of the highest paid male or female writers of her time. So you can really see how well she wrote and how well she was respected within the community by how quickly she rose to fame. Her works, which had been criticized as too harsh or inappropriate, they were the topic of discussion not only in her town and her city, but nationally. She had a national fan following. In the 1860s, she founded a all-women's writing club adjacent to the New York Press Club, which at the time was all males, and this came about through a Charles Dickens reading in which women weren't allowed to attend. So Fern wasn't the only one of her time really pushing against the patriarchal dominated society, but she definitely had a famous voice in women's suffrage. And though she's not attributed with being a feminist or really contributing to women's suffrage, it was her voice and her outspoken demeanor that really helped women to have a voice and really helped people to talk about the topics that weren't being talked about. I want to read a passage from Fern in the Bedford book. It's on page 1213. It's called The Sober Husband, and you can really tell her thoughts and views on the traditional housewife. In the 1800s, the housewife was a complement to the husband. She did what he needed. She did what he needed her to do. She raised the children. She kept the house. She kept her husband happy. And in this article called The Sober Husband, you can really tell Fern's sort of discontent with that gender role. If your husband looks grave, let him alone. Don't disturb or annoy him. This is the quote underneath the title. And a lot of her articles start with a quote that is usually against women. And underneath, she writes her own opinions about it. So underneath this quote, she goes to say, "Oh, pshaw. When I'm married, the soberer my husband looked, the more fun I'd rattle about his ears. Don't disturb him. I guess so. I'd salt his coffee and pepper his tea and sugar his beefsteak and tread on his toes and hide his newspaper and sew up his pockets, put pins in his slippers, and dip his cigars in water, and I wouldn't stop for the great mogul till I'd shorten his long face to my liking." I really enjoy her word choice here. In a time where women weren't supposed to be educated, Fern had a really strong writing style. And not only that, she had a really strong direction. She didn't only just write for women's suffrage or for women, but she wrote for the sick. In one of her articles labeled Blackwell's Island, I think, she talks about prostitution, the treatment of mentally ill prisoners, and just the treatment of prisoners in general. So you could tell that she really had a broad viewpoint for not only just the women issues in society, but she also had opinions about other issues that were going on in society that, again, other people weren't talking about. So I feel like Fern's contribution to American literature was a sort of outspoken, ironic style for women that hadn't been heard yet. And I feel like her voice allowed other women to start writing out against the things that they felt like was wrong in society. So um, I say thank you, Fanny Fern, for allowing people to write how they want to write. And that's all I got. Thank you.